Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios, and welcome back to another acrylic painting tutorial. Today, we're going to be looking at creating a sky in one-point perspective. So this is a tutorial I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and I'm really happy to finally be working on it today. So for this, I've laid out a simple perspective grid on a piece of watercolor paper, which I've taped down to my surface. I've just put an X in the center for my vanishing point and just pulled all my lines out from there. My horizon line is pretty close to the bottom, got about an inch or so, maybe an inch and a half or so here from the bottom, just to kind of really focus on the sky as the main part of this piece. Now I drew my pencil lines significantly darker than I would normally, mainly because I want to be sure that these show up on camera. The biggest thing here is that these pencil lines are going to show through a lot of the paint that I'm doing today. One, because I'll be painting thinner, working on paper, and two, because again I pushed a little harder with the pencil, specifically so you could see the lines, but when you paint, don't push as hard and be sure that your pencil lines are not showing through. As always, in the lower left or right hand corner of the screen, I don't know what it is yet because I'm still recording this video, I have the palette, which have a few colors laid out already. I have my regular deep black, which is a Mars and ivory black mix. Two sections of titanium white, and I'll probably need a big glob of it more in a little bit later. Some phthalo blue, which is a really nice basic sky color. And we have a little bit of cad yellow medium, which we're not going to even touch until the end. You'll understand later, but for now, don't worry about it. In terms of brushes and other tools, you want a small palette knife. Now you don't necessarily have to have this, but it is a nice tool to have, particularly for mixing your paint on a palette. And then I just have two flat brushes. One's a little bit larger, one's a little bit smaller. These two should be all we need for creating this sky. And before I get too carried away, I do want to drop in a quick gradient for the sky. I'm just going to throw that into time-lapse. This tutorial is really about the clouds, not about the sky itself. So for this, I'm just going to start a little bit darker, work to a lighter gradient right on the horizon where I want my light to be coming from. Okay, so in addition to dropping in the sky, I also dropped in a bit of baseland to give the rest of this some context. And you also saw me putting some lines down with black Conte crayon. Now the reason why I did this is specifically so you guys could see the perspective lines. The pencil lines that I had painted on top of, I just about covered up, which is, for a real painting, very good. For this demo, not so much. So for this, I wanted just to lay that down. Now normally when laying in Conte crayon on canvas, on top of paint or something like that, it'll very easily wipe away with water. Because both my paint still being a little bit tacky, as well as the fact that this is paper, it's probably not going to erase very well. So for future reference, don't use particularly a dark Conte on top of a light surface of paint, especially if you're working on paper. But for this demo, it's going to work really well for this. And then some of this dark is just going to mix right into the paint as well. So a while back, I did a tutorial on 0-point perspective, understanding perspective in landscapes. And that particular tutorial, I talked about how basically the horizon line acts as one big vanishing point. And if you're doing something like trees or rocks or whatever, a lot of times it's just they're smaller in the background, they're bigger in the foreground. This isn't to say, though, that you don't use perspective in landscapes, and that's really what this tutorial is about today. We're going to use these lines to map out some really interesting clouds, the way they sort of ease back to a specific point on the horizon. Some of the most impactful landscapes out there exist in either like single or 2-point perspective, simply because they use the lines in whether they're using actual guidelines like this or just something mental. You know, your clouds are leading to a point, and it really creates a more dynamic landscape. So that's enough of me talking. Why don't we actually get started painting today? So I'm going to grab the smaller of the two flat brushes and get that in a little bit of water. And for this, we're just going to need sort of a base sort of shadow color to kind of map out our clouds. Now, I'm not going to get in too much detail today about the actual color of the clouds, specifically because I already have a video tutorial on that, and it's called Fluffy Clouds. I think it's number 2. It's the updated version of my old one. So I'm not going to do too much talking on specific shapes or anything like that, because you can just watch that tutorial, and it covers a lot more about the layering techniques that I use in my work. So for this, we're basically just going to follow our guidelines. They're going to be smaller and thinner towards the back, and bigger and sort of rounder or fluffier towards the front, where our lines kind of spread out. So I'm just going to take this brush and kind of little side-to-side motions here. And you can start out actually just by following the line and just kind of building your cloud around that line. So we'll start with one of the ones further out to the two sides. The top ones are going to be a little trickier. So just kind of little side-to-side motions. And as you get further out, you can push a little further on your brush and really kind of spread that out. Like so. Just a couple into that, there. And spread it out, don't just make it a big line, you know. You can expand out. And the more lines you put in as a base, you can kind of if you're not familiar with perspective well enough, you can kind of work from that more. I'm spreading out just naturally, just because I can look at this and visualize where those grids are. I don't need to draw every single line for it. But if you need it, go ahead and work on those, mapping out those grids for your work. But the more you do it, the more it's just gonna come naturally to you, and you'll just be able to kind of see it without actually drawing it. So. And we're further back towards the horizon here, and still kind of keeping it, I'm spreading out, but I'm still kind of keeping it really thin and light here, because I want those clouds to really be far in the back. So I'm not completely ignoring single point perspective, but I'm also employing that 0 point perspective that I mentioned earlier. Round this out a little bit here. And this is just your basically your shadow color here. So it's bound to be a little different. Okay, now we're getting towards the front. And wow, this was a slow from small to large. This is going to happen faster because they're shorter lines here. So the speed of growth happens faster. And that's just the trick to really getting a good shape to your cloud, especially when talking about perspective in skies. So like just a couple little ones, and then already we're getting big here. Just big. And you notice I'm mixing some black and gray into my blue for this shadow color. Particularly because, one, you don't want just gray or black for your clouds unless you're painting monochromatically. But also because you want a little more complexity. You want a little bit of the sky color in your clouds, but you also want a little bit of a nice deep shadow color. So whether you're using black or like a deep purple or something like that, it's definitely worth it to kind of play with your colors a bit more, rather than just using whatever you have straight out of the tube. Okay, that's a pretty good set of shadow clouds. I'm gonna add a couple more just right in here. About like that. And as you can see, that's already starting to really kind of take shape. This is one of the things I love about this technique, is because it's so impactful when it creates a really great sort of base for any kind of landscape. Particularly if you're working on the sky, it's like that is going to create something really, really awesome. So I'm actually going to try and erase some of these lines now. For that, just pull paper towel, Kleenex, rag, whatever you have, a little bit of water, and then with the chalk or pastel or Conte, you can usually kind of just wipe away, as long as the painting surface underneath is dry. And it's kind of working. Again, because I'm on paper, it's not doing as good of a job as it should. Also because I put the Conte lines down when the paint was still wet, so it's probably mixing in a little bit too much. But again, if this was just dry canvas, actually I can probably do it on this lower segment to show you. If it's just pastel on the corner here and it's dry, that's going to come up a lot easier. Kind of not. It's got to be the paper, I tell you. It's not this. It works better on canvas. I promise. Alright. It's probably about as good as we're going to get, but again, just a demonstration, not really concerned. Okay, so we're going to start working our lights in now. And again, if you watched Clouds tutorial number 2, you will have kind of seen this already. And it's basically just, now that we've laid down a base color, anything with any of the techniques that I show, it's always about layering. So we're just going to get mostly white. We got some of the remaining color on our brush from the water and just having not cleaned it thoroughly, but that's actually going to help us out in our favor here. So we have a little bit of an off-white, and because our light's coming from sort of the bottom, and I kind of imagined it similar to like an early morning thing. Sun's come up, but it's still a little hazy. So all that light's going to be coming up from the center and everything towards the horizon more. So that's where our light's coming from. Our highlights are going to be on the underside of all of these clouds. And since we already have our shapes down, this just becomes super, super easy. Probably need a little thicker paint on my brush here. Don't forget about where your light source is, because that can really screw up your highlights. But of course, it's paint, and if you make a mistake, paint over it, do something else. Not the end of the world. And like here, don't be afraid to create clouds within your clouds. It's not just one shape entity. You have multiple little ones in there layering on top of each other. And one thing I've learned over time is it's really easy to overwork your colors and just keep blending it in and keep blending it in. Make a brush stroke and just live with it. It's so much fun to just make a stroke and step back and go, oh, you know what? That looks okay. You don't have to highlight every little thing. Just what you feel is important in your little world. And now I'm starting to sound like Bob Ross. But that's not to hate to keep narrating this, but that's what I love about painting so much. Is you just get so creative, and building worlds to whatever degree that you do, whether you do characters or landscapes, is one of the great joys in art. Again, just kind of wiggling the brush back and forth. And here, again, really pay attention to where you're putting those highlights in. Bigger strokes the further back you go. Because we're tighter in, you can really, make those jumps faster. Trying to get a good transition between the dark and the light here now. More white. don't ignore your small ones just because they're small. And I'm using the corner of the brush for the really thin details here. As long as you have a nice quality flat brush and you take care of it, you can really do some nice detailing just with the corner of the brush. You see me keep going back for paint, keep going back for paint. You know, it's the one thing about painting that if you're not used to it will annoy you. Is like a couple strokes, go back for paint, couple strokes, go back for paint. Especially if you're not using a real big brush, using a smaller brush, you just got to keep going back for it. You never want to try and work too dry, unless of course you're doing like a dry brush technique. Also check that video out, I'll throw a card in there for the dry brushing tutorials. And that light's coming in and just catching the undersides of these clouds. Really. Right about like that. And now, just one more layer of highlights, and this thing is really going to start to pop. So remember the yellow I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial? Well, now we're going to use it. Now, you may have seen me when I was time-lapsing, I used a little bit of it in the baseland, but for the reason I put it on the palette was to use it for this reason. Now, I mentioned in a couple of my videos, tutorials, is that the only way to make a white lighter, you might think you can't make white brighter, but if it's white, how do you highlight white? Usually you do it with some color, whether that be warm or cold, whatever sort of your light is in that scene. Because this is a landscape and it's natural light, usually you're thinking yellow to make your white a little bit brighter. Now you don't need a lot, just enough to make sort of a little bit of a creamy white color. And because I painted pretty thick here, I'm going to thin out my paint a little bit more. That is a technique, if you watch a lot of old Bob Ross, he does mention that thin paint sticks to thick paint, and it's totally true. So I'm thinning it out just a little bit further than what I had before. And remember, if you've seen my other tutorials, your final layer of highlights should be used very sparingly. Don't go crazy with it like we did up here. You know, you built your shapes. This is just a little bit to make everything kind of jump out. So I'm going to start, actually got a little further up this time. Just getting a little bit, kind of defining my edges a little. Now, my Fluffy Clouds tutorial, I talk about sometimes it's better not to define your edges. Just really depends on the look you're going for. For this particular type of cloud, I do want to make sure my highlighted edge is a little more defined. Get a little more yellow in here. There we go. Might go too yellow, actually. That's that. And again, I'm not using this everywhere, just a couple of spaces, particularly anything towards the center more, you know, because that's going to be capturing a lot more of the light. And anything way far back towards the horizon, a lot of these small ones, these are going to get some highlights as well. Just a couple here and there. Really kind of bring that to life. And again, one of the things is because this is a demo, and I'm not thinking ahead too much, I'm also going relatively quickly. The more time you spend on things, the better. You know, there's a lot of people, everyone wants to be fast, everyone wants to be super quick, but you don't have to be. take your time, really make sure you're painting accurately before you're trying to paint quickly. And that's, super, super important. Actually, this creamish yellow color has really kind of built in the idea of a morning light, and I really like that. It's particularly with the shadow color of these clouds. And of course, the more layers you use between your original shadow color and your highlight, the more realistic those clouds are going to be. So that's about it for this tutorial. I hope you really enjoyed this one as much as I did. And for more tutorials like this, be sure to subscribe to the DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios channel here on YouTube. This is Ben. See you guys next time.